Okay, so when it comes to copy editing leads, you're going to have a little bit more discretion than you generally do on stories themselves. Depending on the publication you're working with, you might work directly with a reporter to, revise the lead. You also have a little bit more flexibility in your rules as they relate to leads. Y'all have learned that fewer than 35 words is kind of the basis for a lead. You want to have them be concise, and we've taught you that. But guess what? It's not a hard and fast rule. It's not set in stone anywhere, and neither is the idea of one sentence. So technically, if you're working on copy editing and revising a lead, you can break these two rules. You usually don't want to, but you can. Your lead, just like in writing one and copy editing, it's typically going to start with the who or the what. It's generally going to include the when and the where, and it's typically not going to start with the when, because the when is usually not the most important thing. You'll remember that from news reporting and writing and intro. So there's some other things that you need to look for and try to avoid, or copy editor leads to avoid. Passive voice we're going to talk about in just a second, but sometimes you can avoid passive voice, not all the time, but we want to when we can. Weak beginnings, we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about buried leads and no news leads. The ones I'm not going to go into detail on are the long leads, which I think most of you guys can see for yourself when something is too long. Definition leads, you just don't want to use them for any situation, not even just this class. I'm talking like your English classes and your research papers and your everything else. Don't ever start with Merriam-Webster defines such and such as. Just don't do it. Direct quotation leads, again, I think you guys are familiar with the idea that you wouldn't use a quotation to start a news story. Cliches are a little harder to spot, so you kind of have to be aware that that's something that you're looking out for as a copy editor, is things that are cliche. And then also, I didn't put on this list, but your textbook talks about question leads. Obviously, you don't want to write a question for your lead. You don't want to see a lot of question in your news content that you're copy editing. All right, so let's start with passive and active. The simple way to think about this is that active, the subject does the action. Passive, the subject receives the action, okay? We'll talk about what that means in just a second. What I want to point out first is that I'm not telling you every one of your leads has to be active. There can be reason, and I'll give you an example in which you would have a passive lead, and that would be appropriate. But you want to be able to tell the difference and make the right choice, okay? So an active voice would sound like this. Statesboro police arrested a woman for public drunkenness at the Statesboro Bullitt County Library Sunday. Okay, the subject of that does the action. The police arrested. That's active. Passive would be a woman was arrested by the Statesboro Police Sunday at the Statesboro Bullitt County Library for public drunkenness. In that case, the subject is receiving the action. She was arrested. All right? A simpler version, let's look at it this way. An active voice sentence might say, the boy bounced the ball. A passive sentence would say, the ball was bounced by the boy. See how that's not directly doing the action, was bounced as opposed to bounced. Okay, one way to think about this if you have a hard time telling the difference, this is just a trick, but it can be helpful, is to add with zombies after the verb in the sentence. And if that makes sense, then the sentence is passive. So the zombies test basically works by putting an actor in the sentence. A passive voice sentence is not going to be constructed in the way that an actor is doing the action. So if you put an actor in there, it won't make sense. So for example, the boy bounced the ball becomes the boy bounced with zombies the ball. Or the ball was bounced by the boy becomes the ball was bounced with zombies by the boy. This second sentence still makes sense because it's a passive sentence. So if you can put with zombies after the verb and it makes sense, then that's a passive sentence. The other one being active. Now, like I said, you can't always use passive voice. It's not always the best choice. In this example, a massive but brief power outage was reported Monday morning across Bullock, Screven, and Effingham counties. So here, outage was reported. We can tell that's passive. There's not something active that someone's doing that's not an action and a subject here, or a verb and a subject here. But if we make it active, because we could, if we knew who was reporting this, we could say Georgia Power reported a massive but brief power outage, right? The reason we might not want to is because we might have Georgia Power and Excelsior and whatever other companies control power in our area, and having to list all those in the beginning to say this and this and this reported this, right? So it makes more sense, it's more concise, and it helps people understand it better if we make it a passive sentence construction, and that's fine for a lead. On the weak beginnings, you guys know this one. Don't start with the when. We mentioned that already. Attribution, this could be just as simple as thinking about it in terms of what's the most important thing in the lead. So in this lead, the Georgia Southern Police said Wednesday that cars parked along Sweetheart Circle will have to be moved before Saturday's game. Well, the important thing is that they have to be moved, not necessarily that the police said it. I mean, yeah, it matters the police said it, because if somebody who didn't have any authority said it, we wouldn't believe it. But we want to know about the moving of the cars. So cars parked along Sweetheart Circle will have to be moved before Sunday's game, according to Georgia Southern Police, right? Which Georgia Southern Police said would make more sense. Here's the one that actually a lot of people have a hard time with, because we do this automatically. We say there were 5 accidents on Interstate 16 Tuesday as a result of heavy rains and low visibility. But we don't need the there were, right? We can say that 5 accidents occurred on Interstate 16 Tuesday, right? And then continue from there. The no news or buried lead, this is one that unfortunately we get a good bit in news reporting writing when people go to the city council meetings. They have stuff like, the city council met Tuesday morning to discuss upcoming contracts and other city business. Well, your book points out this is the kind of lead that you wouldn't even have to go to the meeting to write. You could just come up with this off of the agenda. So therefore, it's not an informative lead, right? It's a no news lead. So we want to say what the city council did. The city council voted to approve contracts for fire and public safety, or something along those lines. All right, I'm going to give you just a few little examples here of some problem leads. You can pause it and look at it and decide what you think it should be, and then resume the video. Pojo's Food Mart on Country Club Road was robbed by a masked gunman early Sunday morning. Okay, was robbed by a masked gunman should be definitely a flag there. We see that this is passive. How can we make it active? Who's doing the acting? The masked gunman. So a masked gunman robbed Pojo's Food Mart on Country Club Road early Sunday morning. All right, here's one. I pulled this from a local publication. Sharks may have a reputation for being scary, but at the Georgia Southern Museum, they were the star of a week-long educational experience designed to spark curiosity and inspire the next generation of scientists. Okay, so you might have noticed my voice kind of went up at the beginning there because we said something really cheesy. Sharks may have a reputation for being scary. Yeah, they do. All right, I'm glad that I spent the time reading that. So that's a cliche. That's how you feel when you read a cliche in a news story. You can just make it a news story without the cliche. And where's the subject and where's the action, right? The sharks were the stars. So we can say, sharks were the focus of a week-long education experience at the Georgia Southern Museum designed to spark curiosity, and on and on and on and on. Yeah. Okay? Works. How about this last one? Historical figures from across centuries. How do we feel about that? Filled the Statesboro Regional Public Library on Saturday, but not through time travel. In case you thought so. These famous figures were brought to life through the voices of the Statesboro Youth Council. So where's the news in this story? We have the Statesboro Youth Council doing the action, bringing people to life, historic figures to life. So let's use that as the foundation of our lead. The Statesboro Youth Council brought historical voices to life at the Statesboro Regional Public Library Saturday. All right? Okay, that's it for me on this one. See you guys next time.